Hi, welcome back to Baking with Love. I'm Carolyn Stella, aka Stella, coming to you from the PEG TV kitchen studio. And today I'd like to share with you a maple recipe. We are talking maple syrup. It's March, and this is the maple sugaring time of year here in Vermont. Vermont produces the most maple syrup in the whole country. They produce 5.5% of the world's maple syrup. Canada is the #1 country for maple syrup production, with 90% of Canada's production coming from Quebec. But let's look at the US. As I mentioned, Vermont's #1 by a mile. New York State is #2. Then we've got Maine, Wisconsin, Michigan, which was our top tart cherry state. We learned that last month. And then our neighbors, New Hampshire and Pennsylvania. Last year, Vermont produced a record 2.5 million gallons of the sweet stuff. That was up 880,000 gallons from 2021. 2.5 million gallons is enough to fill 4 Olympic swimming pools. Olympic swimming pool holds 660,000 gallons. That's a lot of pancakes. We'll have more fun maple facts as we go, but right now, let's get started with our recipe. Today we're making maple walnut muffins with a streusel topping and a maple glaze. This recipe basically takes 2 bowls, 1 bowl for our dry ingredients and 1 bowl for our wet ingredients. So we're going to sift together 2½ cups of all-purpose flour. Get that sifter going a little bit. And 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. Whoops. A ½ teaspoon of nutmeg. You can tell I'm not lefty. And a ¼ teaspoon of salt. So as we sift, I can tell you a little bit more about maple syrup. We're also going to add 2 teaspoons of baking powder to this. Baking powder is going to be our leavener. Muffins, in other parts of the world, these muffins would be called, no, I want 2 teaspoons. These muffins would be called American muffins as opposed to English muffins, but they are essentially a quick bread. And a quick bread is a bread that doesn't have yeast, so you don't have to let it rise and you don't have to knead it. Let me grab my teaspoon and see where that is. Here we go. So we need 2 teaspoons of baking powder as our leavener. So I'm going to add that to our sifter and keep sifting away. So yes, so a muffin is a kind of cup-shaped cake. What's the difference between a muffin and a cupcake? Cupcakes have frosting, and our muffin is going to have a streusel topping and a little bit of a glaze. So again, this was our dry ingredients bowl, and we're just going to sift this all nicely together. It's going to be nice and fine. Get the cinnamon and the nutmeg through there. And then we're going to have our wet ingredients bowl, and that's where our maple syrup comes in. So a maple tree can produce, a healthy maple tree, average sugar maple tree can produce 5 to 15 gallons of sap per season. And that might depend on weather conditions, the age of the tree, and the health of the tree. Most Vermonters already know it takes 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of the sweet stuff. So one tree might not even make enough sap for 1 gallon of maple syrup. This looks good. Just a couple more taps, and our first bowl, our larger bowl, with our dry ingredients should be ready. Now again, you can always find the recipe for these Baking with Love creations on the PEG TV website. All right, a couple more shakes, and our dry ingredients are good to go. We've got our baking powder in there as the leavener, as I mentioned, and our spices. So we're going to move this stuff to the back, and we're going to our second bowl, which I mentioned are wet ingredients. They're not all wet. The first ingredient is 3/4 cup of butter. So this is 1½ sticks, and that's softened, room temperature. It even could be a little melted. And 3/4 cup of dark brown sugar. I just did 1/4 at a time, firmly packed. And we're going to give this a mix with our hand mixer. Make that the proverbial light and fluffy. And then to that, we're going to add 2 room temperature eggs, and I have them separated, so we're going to add them one at a time, and a little Love, because I have my nice Love measuring cups. So egg number 1, give that a mix. And this is the March episode, but we are always baking with love here. It doesn't have to be just for Valentine's Day. Oh, we missed National Muffin Day. That was at the end of February, so we just missed that. But National Maple Syrup Day is annually December 17th. Our second egg at room temperature into our wet ingredients. And here is the star of our show, Vermont maple syrup. So as you can see, this maple syrup is dark. I'm going to just talk about the different types of Vermont maple syrup. They used to have a grading system, and the grades were A, B, and C, but some people didn't like that their maple syrup wasn't as smart as the other maple syrup. So what they did was they made them all grade A, and they described the maple syrup by the color and by the taste. So the first one is a light color, a delicate taste. Then there's an amber color with a rich taste. And this is a dark color with a robust taste. So we're going to add that robust maple flavor to our wet ingredients. There's one more, a little very dark, and that's a strong taste. But this used to be letter B, but I think for baking, this is A+ maple syrup. So we're going to add that into our egg, butter, and brown sugar mixture. 3/4 cup of robust, real Vermont maple syrup. Oh, I wish you could smell it in here. It really smells like a sugar house right now. And then, for a little extra maple flavor, we've got, it's only in 1 spoon, but this is actually 2 teaspoons of maple extract and 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. So that is what we consider our wet ingredients. And I'll just scrape down the bowl a little bit. Okay, so we are going to move a couple things again. And we're going to combine our wet and our dry bowls. To do that, I'm going to do it in a few increments. So I'm going to do about half of the wet, and then I'm going to alternate with, this is a 1/2 cup of milk. I'm going to add that also. So we're going to just do about a 1/2 of the wet. I'm just going to use my spatula for this. Pour that in. Start to mix, and about half the milk. And again, we don't want to beat it up too much. We want our muffins to be light and tender and moist. And we're just going to keep mixing to get that flour incorporated. Let's think of some other fun maple facts that I can share as we mix this up. This is the other half of the liquid ingredients. There are people already sugaring, and I know that because of the mild winter that some people were collecting sap by me in mid-February. So it's been a little bit early season. I don't know what the sugar content is, but that's why they changed the name, because the labeling of the grades. The other half of that milk, the lighter syrup tends to be from earlier in the season. It has a higher sugar content, so it doesn't need to be boiled as long. And then as the season goes on, the sugar content of the sap tends to be a little bit less, and it takes longer for it to get made into syrup. So it will boil longer and hence get darker. And again, we're using that nice, dark, robust syrup for this recipe. All right, that looks good. There's just a little bit more on the bottom. I've got to get that flour incorporated You don't want anybody biting into your muffin and seeing a white streak of all-purpose flour. All right, now to make these maple walnut muffins. Oh, before the show, before you got here, I did a little toasting and chopping of nuts. You might remember our Stella episode. I talked about how I like to toast nuts for recipes. So it adds to the nutty flavor and gives it a little crunch. So this is 1 cup of toasted and chopped walnuts. So now it's a maple walnut muffin. And of course, as always, we'll add our cup of love. So now we're just going to mix those in. And we've got our wet ingredients, we've got our dry ingredients, we've got our toasted chopped walnuts, and we've got lots of love. That's it. So simple. So now it's time to make our muffins. So what I prepared today are 2 muffin tins, and again, we'll just do a little cleanup. These are regular size, I would call them, with our papers. Again, we've got our hearts, and I'm going to transfer the batter using just kind of a ladle spoon. Some people I know use a ice cream scoop for this. Some people have batter bowls that pour, but I'm just going to use this spoon and probably my clean finger to make our 18 muffins. Now, I have a bigger, I call it the mega muffin tin, and I mentioned that when we made our bumpy pumpkin bread. If you wanted to make those, of course, you'd have less muffins and you'd have to increase the baking time accordingly. And also, this could make a maple walnut coffee cake if you wanted to do it in a loaf pan. Again, just have to adjust the baking time. So if you went to see the pumpkin bread recipe episode, you could probably find out the timing for that. But this is going to be a nice 1.5 dozen maple walnut muffins, and then we've got to get to our streusel topping and our maple glaze. So you just kind of keep filling these up. They will pop up a little bit, again, thanks to our baking powder. So they should get a nice rounded muffin top. And again, you want them to be pretty even so that they bake all the same. You don't want to have one that's too big and underdone or one that's too little and gets a little dried up. And if I have more, I'll go back and top them off a little bit. That one looks a little chintzy. Okay. All right, on to the other pan of 6. Really does smell like Sugar House. If you've never been, there's a Maple Fest weekend every year in March where sugar houses are open all around the state, and you can go see the art and science, it is science, of making sap into maple syrup and then making all these maple treats, including maple walnut muffins. Oh, there are 4 states that have an official state muffin. New York has the apple muffin. Massachusetts has the corn muffin. 2 states have blueberry, which I heard blueberry is the #1 favorite muffin in the United States. Washington State and, not Michigan, what's the other M state that has blueberry? And I think that we should start a campaign to make maple or maple walnut muffins the official state muffin of Vermont. Who's with me on that? Governor Scott, are you watching? You can get back to me. All right, so let's try to make this our state muffin. Why not? Maybe I could bring some to Montpelier and change some minds. All right, so that pretty much is our 18 muffins. I just don't want to waste any of this batter, so I'm really giving the bowl a good scrape and then just going back and making sure that every little muffin cup is happy. Let's see, a little bit more on the spoon, and that ought to do it. My mom used to say, waste not, want not, so We'll just get all that in the tins. All right, give my hands a wipe. And now, something a little different. I'm going to pop these in the oven, preheated, 400-degree oven. But I always tell you that I like to rotate my items halfway through. Today, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to close this door and leave it until the end, till I start to check for doneness. So it's going to be 5 minutes on 400, and then about 15 to maybe 17 minutes on 375. We'll lower the temp. All right, so now while our muffins are baking, we are going to make our streusel topping, which you might also remember from the Bumpy Pumpkin Bread episode, that streusel is a word that means strewn about. So we're going to make this kind of crumb mixture to, again, I'm just going to do a little cleanup, this crumb mixture to sprinkle on top of our, oh no, I don't want to put them in yet. Whoops, good thing. They're hot, but I can handle it. We got to put the streusel on before we bake our muffins. So that was silly. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to take 6 tablespoons, I couldn't wait to bake them, they smell so good. 6 tablespoons of all-purpose flour, 1 tablespoon of granulated sugar, half a teaspoon of cinnamon, and 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. But if you want to use 1 tablespoon of brown sugar, and if you have it, 1 tablespoon of maple sugar, you can do that. And then 3 tablespoons of melted butter. And this butter was melted. It got a little more solid while we talked about making our muffins. But let's just get that. And we're going to mix that with a fork and make our crumbly streusel. Oh, and also in our streusel, a little bit more of the nuts. And the nuts are also toasted and chopped. I chopped them a little finer for the streusel topping. But again, that butter got a little more solid. Melted butter's fine for this. And you just want to keep mixing until it's all incorporated, just like we did with the batter, and there's not any white or streaky flour. You could make them without the streusel if you wanted. And you also, for those people that are staying away from nuts, you could just make them straight maple without the streusel nuts or without the nuts in the batter. Okay, so we'll just keep mixing this and get a nice crumbly texture, and it'll kind of stick together. So when you go to put it on top of your muffins, you can kind of bunch it together with your fingers and then break it up into crumbs the size that you'd like. Get that butter in there. Okay, so now we've got our streusel crumbs, and we're going to top our maple muffins. Couldn't wait to get them in the oven. Really, it smells good in here now. Wait till they start to bake. Okay, so here's our streusel. And again, you're just going to crumble it on each muffin, go through the pan, just when I had my hands cleaned off. And give everybody a nice crumble. This will make a nice crunch on the top, a little extra maple flavor. Oh, and the nuts. So some of them won't have nuts, so if you have people that are less nutty, those 6 muffins are for them, and the rest of the people, they can get streusel with nuts. That's why it's good to have all your ingredients right there, and that way, if you get done and something's left, you know you didn't put it in. Before you go to bake it, you really need to check that. You check your recipe. Read the recipe before is another good tip, before you even start, so that you don't end up, sometimes if they have something that's supposed to be divided and you just see it in the original recipe, the amount, and you end up putting the whole thing in, then you might have to double your recipe, or even worse, just throw everything away and start from scratch. So now we've got our muffins with streusel, and this makes, the amount I said was a generous amount of streusel. So if you were to make the big muffins, you would have enough for them. So again, a little wipe for my hands. And now into our 400-degree preheated oven for 5 minutes, and then lower the temperature. Don't open the door, and that'll make your muffin tops nice and round. And we'll do that for 15 to 17 minutes. We'll start checking with our toothpick. Okay, now as our muffins are baking with our streusel topping, we will make our maple glaze. So this is triple maple, right? We've got in this little ramekin, I've got half a cup of confectionery sugar, and we're going to add, this is 2.5, I know I don't have it divided that way, this is 2.5 teaspoons of whole milk. That was 2 teaspoons, even though it was in a tablespoon, and then 1/2 teaspoon, get that moistened. And then we're going to add 1/2 tablespoon of our nice, dark, robust maple syrup. And again, for a little extra maple punch, we're going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of maple extract. Now, like most glazes or frostings like this, if it's too thin, you can add a little more confectionery sugar. And if it's too thick, you can add a little more milk, but only at about a drop at a time, because the milk will really make it watery. So you want it a nice consistency, kind of a thick drip to drizzle with. And this looks great. I'm just going to keep mixing. You can have that confectionery flour sifted, confectionery sugar sifted first so that it doesn't have any lumps. So I'm just going to take my spoon. I think that's a good drizzle. It might use a little more confectionery sugar, but I think we're gonna go with it. I can drizzle that. Okay, so now from the magic of TV, we're going about 20 minutes into the future, and we're going to take out our hot muffins and we're going to let them cool in the muffin tins for a few minutes, and then when it's safe to remove them, you can take them out of the muffin tins and onto your cooling rack. Now the thing about drizzling your glaze is that your muffins have to be totally cool, because otherwise the glaze will really melt. So we're going to just transfer these when they're probably about 5 minutes out. They'll still be warm, but they won't burn your fingers. I think we have room for all 18. And actually, what I think I'll do is take down, you would cool them on this rack, take down the legs, and I'll just drizzle right on here. And if some drips through, I'll just clean up the counter after that. So again, you just take the end of a spoon. Now, you can use your imagination when you drizzle. Some people might want to drizzle a spiral, some people might want to do a zigzag, some people might want to do crisscross, but again, you just make it look the way you like and about the amount of drizzle that you would like of this glaze. So this is our maple glaze on top of our maple walnut streusel muffins. Don't forget the streusel, and I'm going to do a couple that are just zigzag, a couple that are crisscross. You can do diagonal. Really just use your imagination. I'm sure kids would like to do this with you. If you have little bakers that want to help, this could be a really nice art project. And then you have to let the glaze set a little bit, not too long, before, it's going to be hard to wait, but before you eat these, it would be nice to have the glaze set up a little bit. So a couple more drizzles, and then let's talk about how you eat a muffin. I thought there was only one way to eat a muffin, the way I eat them. And then when researching this show, I started asking people and observing people with some of my test batches, and I come to find out there's a lot of controversy in this department. So there's people that just pick at muffins with their fingers, people that peel back the paper and just bite right into it, people that cut muffins either vertically or horizontally. Some people use them, use utensils to eat muffins. This is all nice and drizzled. Again, some people might want a little more, some people might want a little less. It's really nice and sweet and mapley. That looks good. So how I eat a muffin, I take off the paper, I rip off the top, I eat the bottom first, and then I eat the top. But no matter how you eat your muffins, these maple walnut streusel muffins with a maple glaze are maple-licious. So I hope you have a happy maple season, and I hope you'll be back next time. Thanks for watching Baking with Love.